The chill of the vellum under my hand is the only thing that feels real. 70 years of memories have become ghosts, but the ink on these pages, this secret history, remains. My name is Dr. Alastair Finch, and I was once a physician to kings. Now I am merely the curator of their shadows. My fingers, gnarled with age, trace the outline of a child's drawing tucked between the brittle leaves of my journal. It is a crude bird, its wings a smudge of berry juice, its eye a single joyful dot. A gift from a princess whose name was scratched from the ledgers of the world. She was my first, the one who opened my eyes to the gilded cages where royalty kept its imperfect angels. It was 1889. I was young then, my mind polished with the certainties of science, and my ambition honed by the promise of a royal appointment. A summons came from a minor Bavarian palace, a place of oppressive quiet nestled in a dark forest. I was led not to the grand staterooms, but through a labyrinth of forgotten corridors to what the servants called the stiller Flügel, the quiet wing. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and disuse. There, in a room where the sunlight was rationed by heavy velvet curtains, I met Princess Alexandra. She was 25. Yet her world was contained in the space between her chair and the gilded cage of her pet canaries. The official diagnosis was idiocy, a word as blunt and brutal as a headsman's axe. What I saw was something else. Her eyes, the almond shape that marked her as different, followed the flight of a dust mote with an intensity I had only seen in astronomers tracking a new star. Her governess, a woman named Helga, whose kindness was etched into the weary lines of her face, spoke to her in soft tones, never expecting an answer, only offering comfort. I was there to treat a recurring fever, a simple task, but as I worked, the princess reached out and gently touched the silver buckle on my medical bag, her lips curling into a smile of pure, uncomplicated delight. Her parents, the Duke and Duchess, received my report in a separate room. They never asked of her comfort or her happiness, only if her condition would worsen. They spoke of her as one speaks of a regrettable inheritance, a stain on the dynastic tapestry. As I left the quiet wing that day, Helga slipped the small drawing into my hand.
"She loves birds," she whispered, her voice cracking. "She believes they are souls who have not forgotten how to sing." I walked away from that palace with a chilling new understanding. In the highest echelons of society, a soul that only knew how to sing was a liability. My reputation for discretion grew. I became the silent confessor for Europe's royal houses, the physician summoned when nature deviated from the severe lines of heraldry. My journeys took me into the heart of their deepest shame. In Spain, I was led into the Escorial's damp underbelly to examine an infant prince of the Habsburg line, a dynasty so intertwined with itself it was strangling its own blood. The child was beautiful, but for the telltale features, a flat nasal bridge, a single deep crease across his tiny palm. The court physician, a man whose eyes held a century of secrets, spoke to me in encoded Latin of mongoloid features and the curse of cousin marriages. While we catalogued the boy's physical failings, he did nothing but radiate a profound affection, grasping my finger with a strength that defied his fragility. He wanted only to be held, a simple human need in a place that saw him as a monstrous equation of impure blood. I saw him twice more before he failed to thrive, his name literally chiseled off a preparatory baptismal record. I began my secret journal then, an act of scientific treason. I documented what the official histories erased. I wrote of the Ottoman prince in the Topkapi's Kafis, who spent 2 decades arranging colored glass into mosaics no one would ever see, humming songs only the guards would ever hear. I recorded the whispers of a French wet nurse, interrogated after the 43-day life of an unnamed son of Louis XIII, a child whose heart was likely as fragile as the political alliances his existence threatened. Each entry was a ghost, a life reduced to a footnote in a physician's private ledger.
A royal chamberlain in Vienna once warned me, his voice a silken threat. Dr. Finch, your interest in these unfortunate cases is noted. Remember that history is written by the survivors, not by their mistakes. He called them mistakes. I had begun to see them as the only truly innocent souls in a world of corrupted power. My journal became heavier with each passing year, not with the weight of paper and ink, but with the burden of remembrance. I was no longer just a doctor. I was a witness, the sole keeper of a silent, sorrowful kingdom.
The summons I most dreaded finally arrived in the winter of 1916. Russia, the Romanovs. The Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo was a world unto itself, a glittering facade over a foundation of political rot. My patient was Grand Duchess Tatiana, though that was not her given name. She had none. She was the Tsar's phantom daughter, born in 1899 and declared an infant daughter died young in every official genealogy. For 17 years, she had lived in the East Wing, a ghost tended by a small, loyal staff. I expected to find a girl lost in the fog of her condition, another Alexandra content with her canaries. But Tatiana was a universe. She did not speak, not in words, but she conversed in light and color. Her room was a cathedral of her own making. Thousands of pieces of colored glass, polished stones, and fallen leaves were arranged in breathtakingly intricate patterns across the floor. She would spend her days moving a single shard of blue glass a fraction of an inch, humming a single resonant note, her face a mask of serene concentration. She understood patterns I could not perceive, a silent mathematics of beauty. I would sit with her for hours, not as her physician, but as her guest. She once took my hand and led me to a pattern of white river stones. She rearranged 3 of them, then looked at me, her eyes clear and intelligent. It took me a full day to understand. She had replicated the constellation Orion, which was visible from her window. This girl, deemed an idiot by her family, was mapping the heavens on her floor. I felt a dangerous, protective affection bloom in my chest. I saw in her not a genetic flaw, but a different kind of perfection, a soul untouched by the ambition and decay that was consuming her family and her country. I allowed myself to hope. Perhaps here I could do more than just record a tragedy. Perhaps I could avert one. The world ended in October of 1917. Revolution tore through Petrograd, its furious tide rising to the very gates of the palace. The final days were a blur of screaming, packing, and the burning of documents. The imperial family was preparing to flee, their lives reduced to what could be carried in a few suitcases. I found Tatiana's aunt, the Grand Duchess Ksenia, overseeing the packing of jewels. I pleaded with her, We must make arrangements for Tatiana. She cannot be left here. Xenia didn't look up from the velvet-lined trays of diamonds. There is no Tatiana, she said, her voice as cold and hard as the gems in her hands. There was an infant who died. That is the story. I persisted, my voice rising with the frantic desperation I hadn't felt in 30 years. She is your blood. She is helpless. She finally looked at me, her face a mask of aristocratic disdain. Doctor, that creature is a symbol of the very weakness they accuse us of. She is God's judgment on our line. We are trying to save the future of Russia, not its aberrations. In that moment, the entire brutal truth crashed down upon me. It was not shame that drove them, not fear of public opinion or a misguided understanding of medicine. It was a calculated, monstrous pride. They would rather their daughter be murdered by revolutionaries than have her live and tarnish their fantasy of divine perfection. I ran to the east wing. Gunfire echoed in the distance. The palace was groaning, its life bleeding out. I found Tatiana in her room, calmly placing a piece of amber into one of her mosaics. She looked up at me and smiled, a pure, untroubled light in the encroaching darkness. She was humming her note, the sound of fragile prayer against the savagery outside. The choice was mine, to stay with her in a futile gesture of humanity, or to flee and save the only thing I could, her memory.
Now, in the twilight of my own life, the ghosts are quiet. My London study is filled with the artifacts of my secret career, a Spanish locket with a space for a miniature that was never painted, a single petrified canary feather from Bavaria, and dozens of my own meticulous notes, and the drawing of a bird made with berry juice by a princess who believed in singing souls. I never learned what became of Tatiana. She simply vanished, erased not by the Bolsheviks, but by her own family, long before the first shot was fired. Did a kind servant spirit her away? Did a soldier, hardened by war, find a moment of pity for the woman-child who hummed at the end of the world? I will never know. Her fate is the heaviest page in my journal. My work for emperors and kings earned me titles and wealth, but my true purpose was this clandestine chronicle.
I could not save them from their gilded prisons or their unmarked graves. I could not give them back their names or their places in the world. All I could do was refuse to forget. I dip my pen in the inkwell one last time. My hand trembles, not from age, but from the weight of it all. I write a final entry, not for a medical archive, but for God. They existed, I write. Their blood was royal, but their hearts were pure. They were not mistakes. They were the children who never learned to lie. I look at the crude drawing, at its single, joyful eye. In a world obsessed with bloodlines, it is the only true portrait of nobility I have ever seen. And in the silence of my study, I finally understand. It was never their minds that were deficient, but the hearts of those who hid them away.